In the heart of a bustling, modern metropolis, lived a man named Marcus. Like most people in the 21st century, Marcus was constantly overwhelmed. His phone was a source of never-ending notifications, his boss was demanding, and the city's noise never seemed to stop. Every morning, he woke up with a feeling of dread, wondering what new problem the day would bring. He felt like a small boat lost in a violent ocean storm, tossed around by waves he couldn't control. One Tuesday, everything seemed to go wrong at once. It started with a spilled cup of coffee on his white shirt, followed by a missed train that made him 30 minutes late for a crucial meeting. When he finally arrived at the office, his boss criticized his performance in front of the entire team. Marcus felt a burning sensation of anger and humiliation in his chest. "It's not fair," he whispered to himself. He spent the rest of the afternoon complaining to his colleagues about his bad luck, the terrible public transport, and his impossible boss. By the time he left work, he was mentally and physically exhausted. As he walked home, a sudden rainstorm began. People were running for cover, shouting and cursing the weather. Marcus, however, was too tired to run. He ducked into a small, dusty bookstore he had never noticed before, just to stay dry. The shop was silent, smelling of old paper and vanilla, a stark contrast to the chaotic streets outside. He wandered through the narrow aisles until a small, leather-bound book caught his eye. The title was simple, Meditations. He opened the book to a random page and read a single sentence that stopped his breathing. "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Marcus stared at the words. For his entire life, he had believed the exact opposite. He believed that his happiness depended on his boss being kind, the trains being on time, and the world being fair. This book was suggesting that his frustration didn't come from the spilled coffee or the rain, but from his reaction to them. It was a radical idea that felt both impossible and deeply attractive. He bought the book and sat on a bench under the bookstore's small awning, watching the rain continue to pour. For the first time in years, he didn't feel angry at the weather. He realized that the rain didn't care about his plans. It was simply doing what rain does. The storm was outside, but the real storm, the one that was hurting him, was inside his own mind. He realized that he had spent years trying to control the ocean, instead of learning how to sail his boat. This was his first encounter with Stoicism, and he didn't know it yet, but his life was about to change one thought at a time. The next morning, the sun rose over the city, but the environment remained as chaotic as ever. Marcus sat at his kitchen table, clutching a cup of tea and staring at the small book he had purchased the night before. He kept thinking about that one sentence. "You have power over your mind, not outside events." It sounded beautiful, but he wondered if it was actually practical in the real world. He decided that today would be his first experiment. He would try to apply this ancient wisdom to his modern life. As he arrived at the office, the air felt heavy with tension. His boss, Mr. Sterling, a man known for his unpredictable temper, marched toward Marcus's desk. Before Marcus could even say, "Good morning," Mr. Sterling threw a thick folder onto his desk. "This report is a disaster, Marcus. The client is unhappy, and if this isn't fixed by noon, we are all in trouble. Do you understand?" Usually, at this moment, Marcus's heart would start racing. He would feel a mixture of intense anxiety and defensive anger. He would spend the next hour complaining to his work friends about how unfair Mr. Sterling was. But today, Marcus took a deep breath. He remembered the Stoic lesson about the dichotomy of control. He closed his eyes for a second and asked himself, "What part of this situation can I actually control?" He realized that he could not control Mr. Sterling's anger. He could not control the client's opinion. He could not even control the fact that the deadline was only 3 hours away. These were external events. However, he could control his own focus, his own effort, and his own reaction. He decided to stop worrying about the noise and focus entirely on the signal. "I understand, Mr. Sterling," Marcus said, his voice surprisingly calm and steady. "I will give it my full attention immediately." Mr. Sterling looked confused. He was expecting an excuse or a visible sign of fear, but Marcus just looked peaceful. For the next 3 hours, Marcus worked with a level of concentration he had never experienced before. Whenever a thought of fear entered his mind, "What if I get fired?" or "What if I fail?" he gently pushed it away. He told himself, "That is an external outcome. My job is simply to do my best work right now." By noon, the report was finished. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best he could do in the time provided. He handed it to his boss and went back to his desk. He didn't feel the usual post-stress exhaustion. Instead, he felt a strange sense of detachment. He had done his part, the rest was no longer his burden to carry. That afternoon, he watched his colleagues get frustrated by small things: a slow computer, a rude email, a loud phone call. He realized that they were all prisoners of external events, just as he had been. They were letting the world decide how they should feel. Marcus smiled to himself, feeling like he had discovered a secret superpower. He was learning that peace isn't found by fixing the world, but by fixing the way we look at it. Marcus felt like he was finally gaining some stability, but life has a way of testing our progress exactly when we feel comfortable. For months, Marcus had been saving money for a dream vacation, a week of hiking in the mountains to escape the city's noise. He had booked his flights, packed his bags, and was standing at the airport gate, ready to leave. Suddenly, a red light flashed on the departure screen. "Flight cancelled," the sign read. A massive technical failure had grounded every plane in the city. The airport immediately turned into a scene of pure chaos. People were shouting at the airline staff, some were crying, and others were frantically pacing back and forth. Marcus felt a familiar wave of heat rising in his chest. His heart started to pound. "This is impossible," he thought. "I worked so hard for this. Why does this always happen to me?" He was about to join the crowd and complain when he felt the weight of the small book in his pocket. He pulled it out and found a highlighted section. Amor fati. The book explained that amor fati is not just accepting your fate, it is loving it. It is the idea that every event, no matter how disappointing, is exactly what you need at that moment to grow. The Stoics believe that life is like a fire. Whatever you throw into it, whether it is wood, trash, or even an obstacle, the fire simply uses it to burn brighter. Marcus sat down on his suitcase and watched the angry crowd. He realized that screaming at the staff wouldn't bring his flight back. Being miserable wouldn't make the technical failure disappear. He took a deep breath and asked himself a different question. If this is exactly what is supposed to happen, how can I use this? Instead of spending the night in a crowded airport hotel feeling sorry for himself, Marcus decided to take a train back to his own city. He realized that because of the cancellation, he now had a week of complete freedom with no plans. He spent the next few days exploring parts of his own city he had always ignored. He visited a quiet library, spent hours walking in a local park he had never noticed, and finally had the time to finish his book on Stoicism. By the end of the week, Marcus realized something profound. He wasn't just okay with the cancelled trip, he was actually grateful for it. The quiet days at home had given him more mental clarity than a mountain hike ever could. He had learned that an obstacle is not a wall that stops you, but a new path that leads you somewhere else. He was no longer a victim of his circumstances, he was a student of them. He understood that the world provides the ingredients, but he is the one who chooses the recipe. A few weeks after his experience at the airport, Marcus felt like he was walking through life with a new pair of eyes. However, he was still prone to a very human habit, procrastination. He found himself constantly saying, "I'll call my parents next weekend," or "I'll start that creative project when I have more energy." He was living as if he had an infinite amount of time. Everything changed on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Marcus received a phone call from an old friend. The news was shocking. A former colleague, someone Marcus's age, had suddenly passed away. The silence that followed the news was heavy. For the first time in his life, Marcus felt the cold breath of reality. He realized that he was not an exception to the laws of nature. He, too, was a temporary guest in this world. He went to his bathroom and looked at himself in the mirror. He stared at his reflection, feeling a deep sense of fear. He picked up his Stoic journal and found the phrase, Memento mori. It literally means, remember that you will die. At first, this thought felt depressing and dark. Why would anyone want to think about the end of their life? But as he read further, the ancient wisdom began to shine through the darkness. The Stoics didn't use memento mori to make people sad. They used it to make them present. They believed that if you realize your time is limited, you stop wasting it on trivial things. You stop worrying about small insults, you stop being angry at traffic, and you stop waiting for the perfect moment to be a good person. Marcus realized that the fear of death is actually a fear of not having lived. He looked at his phone. He had a list of emails to answer and a series of meaningless videos he was planning to watch. He put the phone down. Instead, he called his mother. They talked for an hour about things they had ignored for years. He felt a sudden, intense gratitude for the sound of her voice and the simple fact that they were both alive at that moment. The next morning, as he walked to work, the city looked different. The gray buildings and the rushing crowds didn't annoy him. He watched a bird sitting on a fence and felt a strange sense of joy. He understood that every breath was a gift, not a right. Memento mori was not a shadow over his life. It was a light that made everything more vivid. He began to live not for the tomorrow that might never come, but for the today that was right in front of him. He was no longer afraid of the end, because he was finally starting to appreciate the middle. It was Sunday evening, and Marcus was sitting in his quiet apartment, but his mind was anything but peaceful. The next morning, he had to give a high-stakes presentation to the most important clients of the firm. He felt a familiar knot in his stomach. His palms were cold, and his heart was racing. He was trapped in a cycle of what-ifs. What if the technology fails? What if they ask a question I can't answer? What if I look like a fool? He reached for his leather-bound book, looking for a way to calm his nerves. He found a chapter titled Premeditatio Malorum. The concept was shocking. Most modern self-help books told him to visualize success and think only positive thoughts. But the Stoics suggested the exact opposite. They told Marcus to sit quietly and imagine every possible catastrophe that could happen the next day. Marcus closed his eyes and began the exercise. He imagined the projector breaking. He imagined his boss frowning in disappointment. He even imagined himself forgetting his entire speech and standing in awkward silence. At first, this made him feel more anxious, but then something strange happened. As he stared at these worst-case scenarios, they began to lose their power. He realized that even if the presentation was a total disaster, he would still be alive. He would still have his health, his friends, and his integrity. He began to prepare for the obstacles instead of just fearing them. He thought, if the projector breaks, I will use the whiteboard. If they ask a difficult question, I will honestly say I will find the answer and get back to them. By the time he opened his eyes, he felt like he was wearing a suit of armor. The next morning, at the office, something did go wrong. A colleague accidentally deleted one of his main slides right before the meeting. In the past, this would have caused Marcus to have a panic attack. But because he had already lived through this failure in his mind the night before, he was ready. He simply smiled, took a deep breath, and adjusted his presentation without skipping a beat. His composure was so impressive that the clients were more interested in his character than the slides themselves. Marcus realized that anxiety is simply the fear of the unknown. By making the evil known through mental rehearsal, he had taken away its ability to hurt him. He understood that a pilot who has practiced for a storm is much safer than one who only prays for sunshine. He had built a mental shield, and for the first time, he felt truly invincible. Marcus was starting to feel much more peaceful in his solitude, but life is not lived in a vacuum. The real test of a Stoic is not how they behave when they are alone, but how they interact with others, especially the difficult ones. At Marcus's office, there was a colleague named Sarah. Sarah was famous for being uncooperative, constantly complaining, and making sarcastic remarks during meetings. For years, Sarah had been the primary source of Marcus's daily stress. On a Tuesday morning, Marcus was preparing to enter a conference room when he remembered a passage from Marcus Aurelius. "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly." At first, Marcus thought this sounded very pessimistic. But as he read further, he understood the wisdom. The Stoics believe that if you anticipate that people will be difficult, you aren't surprised or hurt when they actually are. As the meeting began, Sarah immediately attacked Marcus's new proposal. "This plan is unrealistic, Marcus," she said with a sharp, cold tone. "I don't know why we are even wasting our time on this." The room went silent. In the past, Marcus would have felt a surge of adrenaline. He would have defended himself with anger, and the meeting would have turned into a bitter confrontation. Instead, Marcus looked at Sarah and saw her through a different lens. He realized that Sarah's rudeness was not about him. It was a reflection of her own internal struggle. The Stoics taught that people only do wrong out of ignorance. They don't know any better. He told himself. "Sarah is like a blind person who has accidentally stepped on my foot. Should I be angry at a blind person for not seeing?" "I appreciate your perspective, Sarah," Marcus replied calmly. "What specific parts of the plan do you think we should adjust?" Sarah looked stunned. She was prepared for a fight, but she found no resistance. Without an enemy to fight, her anger began to evaporate. The meeting continued productively, and for the first time, Marcus didn't feel drained after talking to her. He understood that while he couldn't control Sarah's behavior, he had total control over whether or not her words could hurt him. He realized that other people are like the weather, sometimes it's sunny, and sometimes it's stormy. You don't get angry at the clouds for raining, so why get angry at a person for being difficult? By the end of the day, Marcus felt a strange sense of gratitude for Sarah. She wasn't an obstacle to his peace, she was the gym where he practiced his patience muscles. He was no longer looking for a world without difficult people, he was looking for a version of himself that couldn't be shaken by them. Life was becoming objectively better for Marcus. His discipline at work had led to a promotion, and he finally had enough money to afford the luxuries he had always wanted. He lived in a climate-controlled apartment, ordered expensive meals through apps, and took a private taxi whenever it rained. However, Marcus noticed something disturbing. The more comfortable his life became, the more fragile he felt. A slightly cold coffee or a slow internet connection would ruin his mood for an hour. He had become a slave to his own comforts. He turned to his Stoic journal and found a fascinating practice: voluntary hardship. Seneca, a famous Stoic, used to set aside a few days every month to live like a poor man. He would eat the cheapest food, wear his roughest clothes, and sleep on a hard floor. The goal was to ask himself, "Is this the condition I so feared?" By practicing poverty while he was still rich, Seneca was removing the fear of losing his wealth. He wanted to prove that his happiness did not come from his soft bed or his expensive wine. Marcus decided to try a minimalist weekend. He turned off the heater in his apartment, despite the cold autumn air. He put his smartphone in a drawer and decided to eat only simple, plain rice and beans. Instead of taking an Uber to the park, he walked for 2 hours in the wind. At first, his mind complained loudly. It wanted the dopamine of social media and the warmth of a hot shower. He felt a strong urge to quit. But as the weekend progressed, Marcus felt a strange sense of power returning to him. He realized that the hedonic treadmill, the cycle of always wanting more and better things, could be stopped. He understood that his needs were actually just wants. When he finally took a warm shower on Monday morning, it felt like a miracle. Because he had voluntarily given up his comfort for 2 days, his appreciation for his daily life had increased tenfold. He learned that comfort is a beautiful servant, but a terrible master. If you are afraid of being uncomfortable, you are not truly free. By practicing hardship, Marcus was building a version of himself that could survive and thrive even if he lost his job or his money tomorrow. He was no longer afraid of a bad life, because he had seen that his mind could be at peace even with nothing. He had discovered that the most luxurious thing a human can own is a mind that doesn't need luxury to be happy. Marcus was becoming a master of his external actions, but he realized that his internal world was still being colonized by technology. Like almost everyone in this city, Marcus was addicted to his smartphone. He found himself checking his notifications every 5 minutes, scrolling through social media during lunch, and reading angry comments on the news before bed. His attention was fragmented, scattered like dust in the wind. He felt a constant sense of FOMO, the fear of missing out. One evening, Marcus looked at his screen time report. He had spent 4 hours that day looking at a glowing piece of glass. He felt a deep sense of shame. He was practicing Stoicism to be free, yet he was a digital puppet, moving whenever an app sent him a notification. He opened his meditations and found a quote from Marcus Aurelius. "Your mind will take the shape of what you frequently hold in thought, for the human spirit is colored by such impressions." Marcus realized that by consuming junk, information, celebrity gossip, political arguments, and meaningless videos, he was coloring his soul with gray, anxious thoughts. The Stoics believe that our attention is our most valuable property. If someone tried to steal your money, you would fight back. But we allow apps and strangers to steal our attention every single day for free. Marcus decided to create an inner citadel. He implemented a strict digital discipline. He turned off all non-human notifications. He deleted apps that made him feel envious or angry. Most importantly, he practiced the Stoic morning. Instead of reaching for his phone the moment he woke up, he sat in silence for 10 minutes, focusing only on his breath and his intentions for the day. At first, the silence was uncomfortable. His brain craved the quick dopamine hits of the internet. He felt restless and bored. But after a few days, something miraculous happened. His deep work capacity returned. He could read a book for an hour without looking at his watch. He could have a conversation without checking his pocket. He realized that most of what happens online is external and indifferent. It has nothing to do with his character or his happiness. By reclaiming his attention, Marcus had reclaimed his life. He understood that being informed about everything is not the same as being wise about anything. He was no longer a consumer of noise, he was a creator of his own focus. He had learned that the greatest power in a chaotic world is the ability to look at a ringing phone and say, "Not now. I am busy living." Marcus was enjoying his new sense of inner peace, but he soon realized a new danger. He was becoming a Stoic hermit. He was so focused on his own mind, his own reactions, and his own silence that he had started to ignore the world around him. He felt detached, almost cold. He thought that as long as he was calm, the struggles of others didn't matter. But as he continued his studies, he found that he had misunderstood a fundamental part of the philosophy. He discovered the concept of the circles of concern by a Stoic named Hierocles. Imagine yourself in the center of a small circle. The next circle is your family, then your friends, then your neighbors, and finally, the entire human race. The Stoic goal is not to stay in the center, but to gently pull the outer circles toward the middle until every human being is treated like a member of your own family. The Stoics believe that we are all limbs of the same body. Just as a hand cannot survive without the body, a person cannot truly thrive without helping the community. Marcus decided to put this into practice at his office. There was a young intern named Leo who was clearly struggling. Leo was making mistakes, looking exhausted, and staying late every night. In the past, Marcus would have simply ignored him, thinking, "His stress is an external event, it's not my problem." But now, Marcus saw Leo through the lens of justice, one of the 4 main Stoic virtues. He walked over to Leo's desk, not with a lecture, but with a simple question. "How can I help you finish this task faster?" He spent an hour of his own time teaching Leo the shortcuts he had learned over the years. He didn't do it for praise or for a thank you. He did it because he realized that helping Leo was a natural action, like a heart pumping blood to the rest of the body. Marcus also started to see his city differently. When he saw a homeless person or a stranger in need, he no longer felt a sense of judgment. He practiced empathy, remembering that they too were part of the same cosmopolis, the world's city. He realized that a Stoic is not a cold statue, but a warm, active participant in society. Virtue is not something you have, it is something you do for others. By the end of the month, Marcus noticed something surprising. By focusing on helping others, his own problems felt even smaller. The more he gave, the more full he felt. He had learned that the highest form of self-care is actually to care for the world. He was no longer just a man trying to be calm, he was a man trying to be useful. He understood that we are born to work together, like the two rows of our teeth. Alone, he was just a person, but together with his community, he was a force for good. Exactly 1 year had passed since Marcus first stepped into that dusty bookstore to escape a rainstorm. On the surface, his life looked much the same. He still lived in the same busy city, worked at the same demanding office, and faced the same daily challenges. But as Marcus sat by his window on a quiet Sunday morning, he realized that he was no longer the same man. The internal storm that used to destroy his peace had been replaced by an inner citadel, a fortress of the mind that no external event could conquer. Stoicism had taught him that life is not about waiting for the storm to pass, but about learning how to dance in the rain. He looked back at his journey. He had learned to separate what he could control from what he couldn't. He had learned to love his fate, to prepare for obstacles, and to remember the fragility of time. Most importantly, he had learned that his character was his only true possession. He was no longer a victim of his boss's temper or the city's chaos. He was the architect of his own soul. However, Marcus knew he wasn't perfect. He still felt a flash of anger when someone was rude to him. He still felt a moment of anxiety when a project was late. But the difference was that he now had the tools to handle these feelings. He didn't judge himself for having emotions, he simply observed them and chose not to be ruled by them. He understood the Stoic concept of the prokopton, the person who is making progress. He wasn't a sage or a master, he was a student who practiced every single day. As he prepared for the week ahead, Marcus felt a deep sense of contentment. He realized that the chaotic world outside didn't need to change for him to be happy. Happiness was an inside job. He picked up his pen and wrote one final sentence in his journal for his viewers and friends to remember. The world provides the challenges, but you provide the meaning. He looked out at the bustling streets below. He saw people rushing, looking at their phones, and appearing stressed by the traffic. A year ago, he was one of them. Now, he was a participant in the world, but not a prisoner of it. He stepped out of his apartment and walked into the city with a smile. He was ready for whatever the day would bring, success or failure, sunshine or rain. He was a Stoic, and he was finally, truly free.